Hello, dear friends. It's my last video before Halloween, and I wanted to give you some more spooky reading for that momentous occasion. It's a blue moon this year, an uncommon occurrence, so we should have some good reading to do. So I picked out 5 more short stories that I think would be appropriate for the holiday. Some nice spooky ones, some classics, some ones that were highly influential on the genre, things maybe you haven't read, and I thought we could go through them. But before we do that, I want to mention that next week, in fact, is November, National Novel Writing Month. It's that time again. I think this is my 12th year to participate, so I will be busily engaged in trying to write a novel throughout the month of November. Videos may be a little less frequent because I'll be focused on writing, but I encourage you guys to go to nanowrimo.org, nationalnovelwritingmonth.org, and sign up and do some writing of your own, and you can follow my work there and see how I'm getting along, and feel free to participate. I think it's a lot of fun. It's a great time. I've done it every year for the past 12 years, and I am not planning on stopping anytime soon. So I will check in with you on my progress on that, maybe do a couple videos detailing my process and what I'm working on, and we'll talk about that. But for now, let's get on to some spooky stories. The first spooky story I want to talk about today is by one of my favorite weird fiction writers. His name's Arthur Machen. He was Welsh. This is a compilation of his work, and the story is called The Great God Pan. Arthur Machen was a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. He was interested in some kind of esoteric occult things, and his fiction bears that out. He was interested in fairies, and he was interested in the natural history of the Welsh landscape, so there tends to be a lot of that kind of stuff in his writing. The Great God Pan is one of his best stories. It involves one of my favorite kind of themes in horror stories, which is old forgotten gods who kind of come back and are very, if not evil, they're certainly threatening, and they're certainly dangerous to mess with. And there's sort of a possession involved with someone's attempt to summon the Great God Pan. And I think it's a great atmospheric story. I think it's got a lot of chills in it, and I think it's got a lot of kind of, you know, I think the best horror kind of harkens back to the old days, the old forgotten times before we had the modern illumination and the Enlightenment and all this stuff. And I think this story does a great job of that. All his stories really do a good job of that. And you really kind of feel the terror of the ancient. And so The Great God Pan and all of Arthur Machen's stories are well worth reading. Next up, it wouldn't be Halloween without our old friend Edgar Allan Poe. I have a collection of his work here. In the past, I did a video of my top 5 favorite Poe stories, but I'm not going to recover any of those today. I want to do something different. And this particular story is on my mind because I just rewatched an old classic film with Vincent Price based on this story. All of the Vincent Price and Edgar Allan Poe movies are worth watching. They're great. But this one is The Fall of the House of Usher. And the reason I like this story is it's sort of the prototypical haunted house story. It's one of the first examples of this, having this musty old mansion that's sort of in decay and in decline. The Gothic romance genre before Poe had some castles and things like that. But in terms of a haunted house, I think that Poe's one of the first to really kind of codify that into the horror canon. And so the whole Fall of the House of Usher has a lot of these kind of themes you see over and over again. Again, it's the atmosphere of decay, of old things falling apart, this family that has sort of become ruined over time, a little bit of this ancestral guilt, the idea of sin being able to be passed down from one generation to the next, paranoia, fear, Poe's constant obsession with being buried alive is all in there. It's a great kind of, you know, very Victorian mannered kind of story. I think it works great. So The Fall of the House of Usher is my number 2 pick. And of course, after Poe, in terms of influence, we can't neglect H.P. Lovecraft, another collection of his work. This is all of his short stories. And man, he's got a lot of good ones. And I've done a top 5 Lovecraft stories before. I'm going to pick a different one this time. Lovecraft is most well known for his cosmic horror, his Cthulhu mythos, his really kind of out there stuff. This is sort of an earlier, a little bit more traditional horror story that I'm going to choose. It's called The Picture in the House, but it has a lot of themes that Lovecraft was fond of. It's got this kind of rural New England landscape, and it has this idea of these sort of these native inhabitants who are, you know, a little bit decayed, a little bit decrepit, a little bit corrupted by their isolation, by their inbreeding, things of that nature. He used that a lot in a lot of his stories about these. I mean, they're not quite Appalachian because they're too far north for that, but you get that sense of these kind of like hill people who were just isolated from the rest of society for a long time, and they're like spookily fringe religions, and you know, they're kind of creepy. And so the story, The Picture in the House, involves someone stumbling upon a house of one of these people in the middle of the woods in the dark, and it's just got chills to spare. It's very creepy. None of the elder god stuff is in it, but it does paint a really good picture of the kind of the fear of the dark forest at night and the kind of people that live out alone in the dark forest in cabins and what they might do to you. So I like that story a lot. It's not that well known of his, but The Picture in the House would be my pick for Lovecraft. Next, we're going back again to an early one, and this is a little bit different because it's not really a straight-up horror story, but I think it's worth mentioning. It's Nathaniel Hawthorne, and the story is The Minister's Black Veil. And I love Nathaniel Hawthorne because of the atmosphere in his works. There's a lot to not like about his works. They can be kind of dry and boring. They're very allegorical and kind of didactic and trying to teach you moral lessons and stuff, which I don't really care for. But just it's made up for me by the atmosphere in Hawthorne's work. And it's like Lovecraft. It's all set in New England, and it's all got this kind of old world, musty, puritanical creepiness about the New England residents and their population. And there's just something a little bit odd. It really reminds you of like Salem witch trials and that kind of world people lived in, where they were very fearful. If you've seen that movie, The Witch, where they live out on a farm by themselves in the wilderness, and they're all afraid of witches and stuff. It's sort of this isolation, and it's sort of this fearful old world view where you're afraid of a vengeful god sort of thing. And The Minister's Black Veil is about a minister in a small town who shows up one day wearing a veil over his face, his features completely covered, and he refuses to take it off. And there's a lot of ways to interpret the story, and there's a lot of allegorical meanings you can extract from it. But I just like it because, although it's not really a horror story, it's sort of it has a lot of the same hallmarks of horror stories. It just creates this atmosphere of sort of dread, and no one really knows what's going on, and something creepy is happening. It evokes death by having this blackness over the minister's face the whole time. And Hawthorne is just great at drawing pictures of those kind of creepy New England towns, and so I like that a lot. I love New England, I should say. It sounds like I'm being down on New England by calling it scary. It's my favorite part of the country. I think it's gorgeous, and I like that kind of old world feel that it has, and that the feeling that everything is a little bit just a tad more ancient. I know that it's not ancient by European standards, but by American standards, it's the oldest part of the country, and you really feel it, and I love that. And it does have a creepiness, but I always like that creepiness. I enjoy it a lot. These themes are visited in Hawthorne's novels as well. The Scarlet Letter, and particularly The House of the Seven Gables, really has a very creepy vibe to it and a very great New England vibe. So all of Hawthorne's work is worth reading in my view. Finally, I don't have a copy of this one, but I think it's well worth mentioning because it's a stone cold classic, and if you haven't read it, you have to read it. It's one of the famous archetypical horror stories. It's The Monkey's Paw by W.W. Jacobs. It was published in 1903, and it's a be careful what you wish for kind of story. The couple in the story comes upon this monkey's paw, which is supposed to grant you 3 wishes, and they wish, and it doesn't go well for them. And it's got elements of like a zombie story, and it's got elements of just like what the afterlife is like or what lies beyond the grave. There's a lot of creepiness to it, and the most effective thing about the story is that it never really shows you anything. It's all implied. It's all takes place off camera, so to speak. And I think that's great. You don't get a close-up view of what's actually going on, but it's all implied what's going on, and you can really get that sense of dread in your own mind really builds up. It's such a classic. It's been ripped off a million times. It's been adapted a million times. You've probably already read it, but if you haven't read it, The Monkey's Paw by W.W. Jacobs is a must-read Halloween story, and so I highly recommend it, even though I don't have a copy of it to show you right now. So that's it, my 5 additional spooky stories to read just before Halloween happens. And then we can all move on to the lovely month of Thanksgiving, November, where we will eat heartily and we will hopefully try to write a novel together. So that's my review. I've been Logan Albright. Thank you guys so much for watching. Feel free to leave me a comment down below recommending your favorite scary stories, talking about your noveling project that you're going to do next month. I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to like, and then if you want to subscribe to the channel and see more videos like this, it really helps me out. I'll catch you next time.